Welcome everybody. So a little bit about myself. We're first of all, thank you all for joining us. We're very happy that you're here and you moved to Israel or looking to move to Israel. And of course, we're here to try and help you and guide you through the system. I know it's not easy to leave the comfort of your own home, and things can be really challenging here. There's a lot of bureaucracies, things that work just differently than wherever you're coming from. And this is why we're here tonight. We can empower you and give you the knowledge and tools you need in order to navigate the rental system in Israel. A little bit about myself. As Sammy said, my name is Yair Givati. I'm the managing partner at Givati and Co., a firm that was established by my father in 1969. Unfortunately, my father passed away a little over a year ago, but I'm continuing his legacy of real estate law in Israel. I'm actually a ninth generation Israeli, as Sammy said, and my father did not really speak much English. But it was important for my parents that my brother and I learned the language. So we moved to England as kids for a year when I was 10. And ever since I joined the firm over 15 years ago, I've focused on serving foreigners and Anglos who are looking to buy or rent in Israel. I understand that buying or renting a property in a country where the laws and bureaucracy are different can be very daunting. And so my role is to guide you through every step of the journey and ensure you feel confident with the process. Now, a little bit before we start, there's a lot of information out there. As you can see, there's groups, forums, friends, Facebook. There's a lot of information everywhere. But the trouble is that you don't know if the information is correct or it's up to date. And that's why, even though I think it's really good that you try and find information and make sure you educate yourself. But we highly recommend taking a professional to stand, in your corner, guide and secure in the process and with the up-to-date information. So renting your home in Israel. Why are we speaking about this topic right now? Well, the main reason is that the summer is approaching, and this is when many leases are renewed. And this is when many people start to think about the upcoming lease for the year. In my office alone, most of the staff are Olim, and I've heard about many horror stories of the landlords and rental situation. Even just as a few weeks ago, one of the guys on our team was literally bringing his stuff to the office so he can have a hot shower in our office, because his landlord had
Sorry to
not.
interrupt you here. It was me. I have no shame.
So Sammy did not have a hot shower at home, so he came to the office to have a hot shower. His landlord did not fix the Dud Shemesh system in his apartment. So knowing your rights and ensuring the right information is included in your rental agreement is really, really crucial. That's why we created a rental guide, which we'll send in an email following our webinar. What are we going to speak about today? So the main topics are understanding the leases, the maintenance and responsibilities of both the tenant and the landlord, additional costs they will have to cover, and some tips for success. So understanding the lease and the terms, it all starts with the contract. Now, although a written contract is not something that a must when it comes to rental, the only contract that by law has to be done in writing is the sale and purchase of real estate. That being said, we highly recommend, and I'm sure you would agree, that a written contract with all the details is important. It's something very, very important to have. First of all, because it really sets in writing everything that you're entitled for and what your obligations are. But also, you sign the contract, you agreed on terms. Unless you put it in writing, comes a few months down, 6 months, 8 months, suddenly, there's a disagreement. What did we say? The landlord says one thing, you said a different thing. If you have it in writing, then there's not going to be any argument because it is in writing. Now, although English is not an official language in Israel, there is no issue with having a rental contract in English. That's opposed to a purchase agreement, which would most likely just be in Hebrew. But there's no issue with having a rental contract in English. And, many times, as long as both parties agree to it, meaning the landlord and the tenant, there's no issue at all to having the rental in English. And we do it many, many times. One of the things that, sometimes or many times we see in contracts that we receive that are missing is the description and the proof of ownership. Many people own an apartment and they have an apartment manager who takes care of it. And he just says, "Don't worry, I'll sign it. I'll sign it. I'll manage the apartment. I'll sign on their behalf." I said, "That's great, but show me a power of attorney because I don't want to be in a situation where the landlord afterwards comes to you and says, 'Oh, this is not something I agreed to,' or 'This is not a contract that I've signed.'" And so part of the due diligence that we do prior is to see that the landlord who claims to be the owner is a registered owner, and that whoever signs on his behalf actually has a power of attorney to commit him. Um, some terms that are very important to make sure that are included, of course, are the rent and the payment terms. You have rental that are being paid once a month. It could be quarterly, it could be yearly. It really is all negotiable of what you agree to, but you want to make sure that it's in the contract so there's not going to be any disagreement. Of course, the lease period. Now, it's not just the lease itself, but also any potential extension, any option periods that you have. And we're going to touch about it a bit soon in one of the slides. But one of the things that's important to have is, for example, not to have an option period which is subject to agreement of the landlord and the tenant on a new rent. Because, in Israel, unlike some other countries, there is no limitation on how much the landlord can raise the rent at the end of the lease. So, if you don't have a properly written and described option period, and you just put, okay, we'll agree to it later. So at the end of the term, the landlord can just say, okay, I'm tripling the rent. And then, of course, you're not going to rent it. And that's a way for him to get out of the option period, which he gave to you. It's important to have, a clear definition whether the apartment is coming empty or furnished, or could be also semi-furnished. And if it comes furnished, you want to have a detailed list of what it comes from. So at the end of the lease, when you leave the apartment, there's not going to be any argument whether some items were supposed to be there, or you're taking out, or their state. So it's very important to have a clear list of the items that are left in the apartment and what state they're in. And securities and guarantees, this is something that I'm going to touch on in the next slide. So what are the securities and guarantees that the landlord can request for you? So I guess the two main types of guarantees would be a limited guarantee or no limited. And the difference is really how much it costs the tenant to obtain that guarantee. So, a bank check, a check that is money actually coming out of your account, it's something that costs the tenant, and that's why it's limited. The same thing with a bank guarantee or cash guarantee. All these guarantees by law are limited to up to 3 months rent. And we've seen, I've received contracts from landlords that say, okay, I want a 6 months bank guarantee as a term of guarantee for your obligations. Then I go back to them. I'm sorry, it's very nice you wanted. I could understand even what you wanted, but by law, you're not allowed to do it. So any of these are limited to up to 3 months rent. I would say that in general, 1 month would be on the lower end. 3 months would be on the higher end, which both of them are something that are not that common. And most common is actually a 2 months rent as a limited guarantee. Now, there are other potential guarantees that you can give, such as regular check, an open check, or having a guarantor. These two, for example, do not cost you. You're signing a guarantor on a IOU or having a check for any amount, that's just like the regular check that is open for higher amounts for 50,000 shekels. It's because it doesn't really cost, then the landlord can ask for any amount. And of course, it's negotiable, meaning the fact that he comes and say, I want 100,000 shekel check doesn't mean you have to give to. It's something that you can negotiate, but the law does not limit the amount that he can ask for. It's also very, very important to have a clear terms of the use of the guarantee. For example, you want to make sure that one of the clauses is that before as I wrote there, the landlord would give you a notice to say, like, you're in breach of the contract, or I have not received the payment. And if I don't receive it within, let's say, a 7 days notice, then I'm going to use or cash the guarantee in order to cover the costs. It's also very important to include in the contract, when will you get the guarantees back? We hear many stories of landlords that really make the tenants chase after them at the end of the lease to get it back. So one of the things that I always put in is to make sure that the landlord has to give back the guarantees within 60 days of the end of the lease, or as soon as you showed that you covered any cost, fees, rent, and any items in the apartment that were broken or anything that needs to be fixed. So it's very important for your protection to make sure that all these terms are very, very clear. Now, another item which is always certain, I guess, fighting or argument between landlords and tenants is the maintenance. Who is responsible to fix what? So the law changed in 2017 to limit what the landlord can ask. Until that time, most landlords really said anything that has to be fixed in the apartment, the tenant has to pay for it. In the law, in the change that they made in 2017, it clearly states that the landlord must handle any normal wear and tear to the apartment. So as long as they did not try to open a window with a sledgehammer and the window broke, then it's something that the landlord has to fix. That being said, and this is something that not many people know, is that the law states that if there are any minor repairs and you can negotiate what is a minor repair, usually it would be in the realm of 250 shekels to 500 shekels per repair. He can require you to still pay for it, even if it's coming from normal wear and tear. If there's any damage that is caused by misuse or something was broken intentionally, that's something that the landlord can and will require the tenant to pay. Another thing that the law requires is that repairs must be handled promptly. This is subject or depends on the type of repair. In general, the law states that repairs has to be made within 30 days, unless it's something that really prevents you from using the apartment in a normal way, which usually would include water damage, sewage, electricity, things like that, which have to be tried to be fixed as soon as possible. But the law actually says that it has to be repaired within 3 days. Now, of course, if you have sewage coming up, it's not something you want to wait for 3 days, and that's what the landlord should try and fix it as soon as possible. But by law, he has up to 3 days to fix them. Now, what are additional costs, which in many countries could be included in the rental? In Israel, there are additional costs in the rent on top of the rent, which you would have to pay for. So when it comes to regular utilities like water, electricity, gas, and arnona, arnona is the tax you pay to the local authority for cleaning, garbage collection, schooling, and all of that. These are all items that can be, or the landlord would always, and the law allows the landlord to demand that the tenant would pay for it. Of course, it can be negotiated, and I have seen some agreements that these could be included in the rental agreement. But overall, these are payments that the tenants usually pay, and it's on top of the rent. Um, the vad bite, it really depends. The maintenance, the building fees, the maintenance fees can be divided into two parts. If it's a regular maintenance, such as cleaning or electricity use, let's say for lights in the corridors or for the elevators, these are fees that usually would be paid for by the tenant. But if there are special payments that come, for example, for upgrades of the building or special things that needs to be fixed in the building, these are things that the landlord must pay for, and he is not allowed to require you to pay for it. Now, there could be terms that you agree to that he's asking you to pay and deduct it off the rent, but overall, it's the responsibility of the landlord to pay for it. Now, in the past, landlords really try to throw anything they can at the tenants for them to pay, including their lawyer, meaning the landlord's lawyer. He would ask you to pay for, the fee for drafting the contract and negotiating the contract. As the law states right now, he is not allowed to do it, meaning if his lawyer drafts the contract and negotiate it, it's something that the landlord would have to pay for, and he cannot include that in the agreement that this is something that you as a tenant has to cover. The law also tried to get the landlord to pay for the agent, meaning the law states that the agent on behalf of the landlord the landlord must pay for it, and he can't tell you you have to pay for it. That being said, sadly, they did not draft that clause clearly enough, and many times what we see is that the agent would, advertise the apartment in different locations, in boards, in Yad Stein, for example, certain websites which you can look for it. And but there's no requirement, even if the agent um, would behalf or would advertising the apartment on behalf of the landlord, the agent is not required to show you the apartment unless you sign, a contract with him committing to pay his fees. So I hope they will change the law to make it clear. But at this point, as it is, the agent doesn't have to show you the apartment, even if he's acting on behalf of the landlord. And many times, and very common, the agent would actually get paid by both the landlord and the tenant in order to rent out the apartment. Now, when it comes to the end of the lease, there are certain common practices and something that happen naturally, and some things that you want to make sure and demand that the landlord does. And like I said at the beginning of my talk, so some of the things that the landlord require, and it's very common to have in the contract. He can require the tenant to clean the apartment properly, repaint it. In many times, we have very specific clauses, including what type of paint, what color that he has to paint it in. And it's something that maybe, in other countries is not that common, but in Israel, it's something that it happens all the time. And of course, he can ask you to fix any damages that caused to the apartment during the rental period before you move out. We highly, highly recommend, the day that you leave the apartment, you do a joint and final inspection with the landlord. And we also highly recommend maybe even taking a video, both videos when you take possession of the apartment and a video when you leave, so you can have actually proof what was the state of the apartment when you took it and what was the state when you left the apartment. So there's not going to be any claims in the future. It's something that we also see there happen very often is that you left the apartment, but the landlord doesn't necessarily take back the utility bills in his name. So when you're doing the final inspection and the handover, you should be there and speaking together with the landlord to the utility companies such as water, electricity, gas, and arnona to make sure that the landlords tell them, okay, now it's time to transfer it back to my name. Now it's time for me to take over it and give you a payment method. So you're not going to have to pay, these utility bills after you left the apartment and moved into a different apartment, and you have to start chasing the landlord to make sure that either him or the new tenant take it over. It's something you should do right there and then. Now, something else that happens sometimes, when a tenant comes in, he wants to make some changes to the apartment, whether it's to the layout, whether it's removing certain things or adding certain things in order to make it better for you. But at the end of the lease, the landlord actually can demand, even if he gave you agreement and permission to make these changes when you moved in, he can still require at the end of the lease for you to move it back to the same state as it was the day you moved in. So before making changes or thinking about it, just take that into consideration and the extra cost to see whether it's really worth it or not. For some people it is, for some people it's not. Just do whatever is right for you. A very important clause that people need to think about is anything regarding the cancellation and renewing of the lease. Cancellation is not something that has to be part of it's not required in the rental agreement. And I'm talking about early cancellation. Let's say you have to move back to, the country where you're coming from, or, you got married and you need to move to a bigger apartment. It's not something that the landlord has to include in the contract. It's something that is negotiable. That being said, the law clearly states that, and this is something that happened because of what used to happen in Israel, where the landlord would give himself the right to cancel the agreement for any reason that he needs to, but the tenant would never be able to cancel the lease. So the law, when it came in, when they did the change again in 2017, they made sure they're saying if there is a cancellation clause in the agreement, then the landlord, if he wants to cancel the agreement early, has to give the tenant at least 90 days early notice. And and he must, if the landlord has the right to cancel, he must give the tenant also the right to cancel the agreement, and the tenant has to give the a prior notice of 60 days. So in a way, the tenant had to give less notice than the landlord. Now, as I said at the beginning, if you have a renewal option, it has to be very clearly defined. And the law actually states that the terms, if there is a renewal option, the terms must be set ahead of time in the agreement. So again, you're not going to be facing, a landlord that for some reason doesn't like you and he wants now to triple the rent at the end of the lease. Okay, it's not something that the landlord must give you. And unlike many countries where you can have a long-term lease, in Israel, if you have 1 or 2 year rental with an option for another 1 or 2 year, that would be considered a long-term rental in Israel. But if you do have the rental option, also for both for your sakes and by law, it has to be clearly defined. What are the terms? How long can you extend it for? What is the rent going to be at the end of the lease? Um, Another thing that must be included, that this is on you, on the tenant, is that if you want to renew, if you have an option to renew it, you have to give no less than 60 days prior to the end of the contract in order to renew the lease. So, if you have the option, but you remember it's only 45 days prior to the end of the lease that you want to renew it, the landlord doesn't have to give it to you. You have to give no less than 60 days in order to make sure that you get to use the option period. Now, a few tips, for success from us to you. So first of all, in a way, lose your expectations. Don't compare to what you used to wherever you're coming from. Things here work differently. There's a different system, a different method. You have to learn in a way to adapt and to know that it just works in a different way and accept it. Understand the process and the paperwork. Like we said, for example, if renewal, make sure how long before anything you have to give advance notice. What do you have to sign? What do you have to check? Know what resources are available. For example, agents to find, lawyers to review, make sure you're secured. And like my friend here, Danny, who's going to speak now or shortly, I should say, about the insurances. Know that you have experts that really can help you and make sure you have everything set properly. And last thing is build yourself a team. Create a team that you can trust. An agent, insurance agent, a lawyer, someone to inspect the apartment. There's even companies right now that check what are the how the apartment looks and take videos to make sure that there's not going to be any arguments in the at the end of the lease. So build yourself a team that can really stand in your corner and guarantee your rights. Now, if you have any questions, I'm open to any questions. These are my contact details. Feel free to email me, or this is my cell phone. You can send me a WhatsApp. If you have any questions, feel free, and I'm open now also for any other questions.